Hello and welcome to the Sophia Sessions podcast. I am your host, Nikki Smith, and today we are joined by Jamie Douglas from Response. Not only is Jamie autistic himself, but he's also the parent of a neurodivergent child and an advocate for the autistic community. In this episode, we discuss the changes that need to be made to the UK education system in order to better support neurodivergent young people. We talk about the power of critical thinking and analysis and how language can evoke change. There's a real theme throughout this episode of why children should be at the heart of all decisions that are made about our communities and why prioritising youth voice can make our society better for everybody. Just a quick reminder that any views or opinions discussed on today's episode are personal opinions and not directly linked to Sophia as an organisation. Cool. Well, hello, Jamie.
Hi.
Welcome to the Sophia Sessions podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming over. I'm very excited to have you on board. How are you?
Yes, good, thank you. It's great to be here.
Good. Well, obviously this is your first time on the podcast, isn't it? But you've been to Sophia many a times. And obviously last 2 weeks ago? We're lucky enough to have you in the Autism Advocacy Group.
Yeah, great group. We really enjoyed going along, talking about Taylor Swift quite a lot.
Lots of Taylor Swift.
Just an amazing group of young people to be around.
Yeah, they really enjoyed it, and CJ was absolutely obsessed with the fact that you love Taylor Swift. And they were very happy. They were like, we approve.
Good.
So yeah, it was great to have you there, and great to have, your perspective versus theirs in terms of them being younger people and you being an adult. And having a different experience, apparently so, in a child/adult. But no, it's really great to have you, and obviously, hopefully, you can come along another time.
Definitely.
Amazing. So why don't we start by you just introducing yourself and telling the listeners who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Jamie Douglas. I work for Response, who are a mental health and supported living charity in Oxfordshire. I think we're one of the biggest. And I work in the children and young people's team as one of the operation managers, basically.
Fantastic. What does that role involve? Like, what's your kind of day-to-day look like?
So, yeah, it's making sure we manage our different contracts. So we have different teams that do different things across the sector. So we do a lot of school-based work. We work in CAMS a lot. So I support the workers, make sure that we are meeting our contract requirements. And then also I do a lot of strategic work around continuing to kind of look for gaps in the market that we can kind of support with. And I do a lot of work around neurodiversity as well within Response as an organisation, and we're starting to do a bit more externally. So yeah, I wear many hats and have sort of different roles depending on the day.
Sounds a lot to juggle.
It is, yeah.
Amazing. So how long have you been at Response now?
Nearly 5 years on next Monday. So yeah, quite a long time now.
Yeah, I bet you're part of the furniture now.
It feels like it a little bit. We've had a lot of change in those 5 years. A lot has gone on, and we've gone through a lot of different versions of Response. But I love working there. It's a brilliant organisation.
Amazing. What did you do prior to working at Response?
So basically, I was a teacher. I did have a job in between for about a year. Sort of transitioned out of teaching and worked for a local YMCA in Hampshire. But I was an English teacher for about 12 years. Worked in 3 different schools, did a lot of pastoral work as well, a lot of sort of that side of things. I was very institutionalised in education. I went through school, went to university, went straight back into schools as a teacher, and was there for 12 years. So the last 5-6 years has been a different world for me, but I'm loving it. I think I should have done this sooner, I think.
Amazing. Yeah, that's quite a shift, isn't it? And obviously, as we know, the education systems are a certain way at the moment, and then going into the charity sector and working in a completely different way. Yeah, that must have been quite a transformation for you.
Yeah, I mean, my first role at Response was working in the schools team, the mental health support teams, which is based in schools. And it was really interesting being on the other side of things. Because as a teacher, you kind of are very much in kind of a very specific structured world, and we do things a certain way, and then outsiders coming in do things differently, and there's a bit of jarring. And then suddenly I was on the other side of that and advocating for things, for change, probably butting up against some schools going, no, we don't do it that way. And it was interesting being on both sides and kind of realising that schools need to change. And probably when I was in schools, I didn't realise it as much. So that's been a big learning thing for me generally, is looking at the education system from both sides, and a lot of stuff that needs to change.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess you've kind of got, like you say, two very different hats on in that regard. So you've kind of got the hat of being a previous teacher and maybe having some awareness, or maybe a different awareness of, working with young people and the types of like different needs and complex circumstances. And then now being it from an external point of view and having that exposure to it, it is really like two very different frames of reference, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I get what it's like as a teacher. I understand the strains that schools are under. I think that the third hat is I'm a parent now as well. So throw that in as a parent advocating for my children in their schools. And it's a whole mixture of like different opinions on things.
So in your opinion, what are the things that you think really need to change about the education system?
I think, I don't know, it was really interesting because I was listening to the other podcast you did from your advocacy group, and they mentioned education a few times, I think, and how maybe it didn't fully work for them, and access arrangements and reasonable adjustments and all that kind of stuff. And you can very much go about it from that perspective and think that schools need to be more aware around neurodivergence and the different conditions, and be more forgiving and empathetic and adjusting. But in some ways, I feel like we need to go much more extreme and actually say education system in this country, and probably most countries, isn't working. Every part of it isn't working. The classroom model of everyone sits down and everyone learns from the teacher at the front, I don't think that works for most students, whether neurodivergent or not. I think the structure of the school day, the way that we have this power dynamic of teachers versus young people, I think we could rip the whole system apart. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about that sort of recently as a parent as well as a professional. And the teaching school model that we have in this country particularly is very Victorian.
Yes.
It's based on the Victorian model, and the idea originally was to train up workers for factories. Yeah. So our schools are very factory based. There's a brilliant book called Square Pegs, which is written by Square Peg, which is an organisation that advocates for basically more inclusive education. And they're all sort of different essays really, and one of them is about that idea in there, sort of about the model that we have is getting workers ready for factories and learning rules. And in factories, particularly Victorian factories, you're told what to do and you do it. And if you didn't do it, you're probably like hit and all of that chastisement. And we just modelled our education system on that. And nothing's really changed. We don't hit children anymore in schools, which is good. But otherwise, we tell them off for getting out of their seats. Yeah. We only let them go to the toilet at break times. Like, that's ridiculous if you look at it from that level. And I think we do need to rip it all up and start again. I mean, that's a big thing to push for, and that's probably not something that I have the power to influence, but I think we should come at it from that point of view. And even if we only get halfway down that road, I think we need to actually say that education isn't working.
Yeah, I think that view of like critical thinking is really important though. And actually, funnily enough, Richard was talking on our staff briefing yesterday morning, and he was encouraging us all to kind of, look at the questions in terms of like, look at what we're doing. Are we doing it well? Yes, but are we doing it well enough? And I think it is important to ask those questions and not be afraid to rip things apart or do things differently just because the way that we're doing them is easy or effective or working. And I agree with you in terms of your views on the education system and the whole, stand up when the headmaster walks into assembly and all that stuff. And I think it is based on traditional values and views of what respecting your elders looks like and that hierarchical element. But yeah, it doesn't fit and it's triggering. And for so, like you say, not just neurodivergent young people, but for a lot of young people, it doesn't work anymore. And it might be, that, like you say, you as an individual can't make the whole education system in the whole of the UK change, but having these conversations is the start of at least people thinking differently about it, isn't it? Yeah.
I think we're starting to see some evidence that even more evidence it's not working. Now, if you look at attendance figures, they're getting worse and worse month on month. Yeah. I mean, the government have had a big push since January, particularly the Department of Education, of publishing attendance data. And you look at it and go, well, it's getting worse. More persistent absence, more significant amounts of young people not going to school, more homeschooling is going on because parents are realising it's not working. The pandemic taught us a lot about education and what we could do. And some of it didn't work. Some of it was horrible. I'm sure for teachers it was horrible to be teaching your class via Zoom and stuff. But if we planned for it, it could have worked even better. It could have worked really well. So we need to, I think, learn from that, and then we look at the evidence of the attendance data getting worse and worse and worse. People being excluded for behaviours and not be really questioning, where's this behaviour coming from? What's it communicating? If all the evidence is rising that the school is a worse place to be than it ever has been, we can't ignore that data. Particularly if the government are obsessing about data, seemingly they are with attendance. Don't just publish it, learn from it. Let's get experts in the room of all different fields and say, right, what needs to change? And that's not happening. Hopefully it will happen, but I'm sceptical about whether it will.
I feel like we need like a pilot study. So like literally build a brand new school, like literally from the bricks, because even the physical layout at schools doesn't work for a lot of people. So if we had the power to literally build a completely new structure in the way that the collective of experts think it might work, that would be like the best social experiment. And I think in some ways, our representative organisations are trying to do that in terms of working in different ways, working in innovative ways. And 10 years ago, they probably would have been seen as really controversial. So I think in some respects we're on the right path, but that would be really cool, wouldn't it?
It would. I mean, it's definitely happening in pockets, I think. And it's in this year, in many ways, we're not going to see much change now because we know there's a general election coming. But I posted on LinkedIn a few months ago that we're not seeing it, but I really want to see all political parties putting children at the heart of their manifestos. Because that's how we change, not just schools, but society. If we do everything about children. But the problem is, not to get too political, but children don't vote. So all the parties, they're not focusing on children, they're focusing on taxpayers, they're focusing on all that kind of stuff.
The people that vote.
But if we change things, social care systems, school systems, CAMS, all of these systems, if we change it from a child's perspective, we will then improve society for everyone. We're not seeing that, and I think that's what we need to. I think we need a revolution. That's kind of feel like I'm calling for that a little bit. I really feel like we need to really just mess things up and disrupt things and do things like innovatively and differently and like you said, pilot things, and it might not work, but let's try it. We're still being too safe, I think. Yeah,
because it's the kind of easy option, isn't it, to continue things, and with revolution and great change comes a lot of instability, and people don't like instability, do they? It's a very interesting line of thinking. I think that's why youth voice is so important, and also hearing the voices that struggle to be heard. For example, like the neurodiverse community. There's such a gap in that still, but hopefully slowly making progress, but still so much more to be done. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we're in the best place ever for neurodivergence, but we're not in the place we need to be. But at least we're hearing voices. I think hearing young people's voices is really important, and we're still hearing a lot of adult voices, and I would say even we're hearing still a lot of sort of privileged white voices, white voices, adult voices. We need to think about kind of have a representation, but it's good that we're hearing stuff. We're having, there's seems to be articles in national newspapers every week about neurodivergence, as the BBC are doing a lot of interviews with different people. So particularly in the last month, or last few weeks really, with autism awareness stuff going on, that's been really nice to see that. But we need to do more, I think, and we need to represent the whole community and hear young people.
I agree. I think the rise of youth voice, and particularly youth voice around neurodiversity, it's like you say, it's in the best position it's ever been, and it's amazing. Something that I've seen that I'd be really interested to get your opinion on or your views on is that there are certain voices in society that say everybody's talking about neurodiversity now, and therefore everybody's being assessed or diagnosed with autism. And there's almost this underlying tone of that dreaded phrase, everybody's a little bit autistic, or why all of a sudden are people getting diagnosed as autistic or ADHD. What are your views on that?
Yeah, I know there's a backlash. There definitely is, as you always get with any sort of movement. But you've got, I mean, Philippa Perry, who's the sort of psychologist who's married to Grayson Perry, she made some comment a few weeks ago about, oh, everyone's got ADHD now. And Super Nanny, she came out and went, oh, everyone's got letters, you know, ABC, ADHD, or not helpful to hear that stuff. You're always going to get it, but it's not helpful. I mean, I think we have to understand, we shouldn't be knee-jerking this. I do get it from, so if you don't understand this, if you're a certain generation, you grow up and you didn't have autistic people around you. Well, you did, but you didn't know you did.
Yeah.
And you didn't have ADHD people around you. You just had naughty boys in the back of the class and stuff. And then suddenly everyone's going, oh, I've got ADHD and stuff. I can see that perspective, but I think we need to be intelligent enough to kind of go, well, it was always there. We just didn't recognise it.
And it wasn't labelled.
And it wasn't labelled.
Yeah.
But then these people, you know, those naughty boys at the back of the class, because it is often a male profile, a lot of them ended up in prison, or they ended up unemployed, they ended up homeless. If we'd put the support in, what could have they contributed to society? We shouldn't be blaming these people. We should be looking at the support that was missed and be appreciative of the fact that we are now supporting these people. And the rise in labelling of people isn't because everyone wants a label, it's because we're actually better at recognising it now. So we need to be intelligent in that, and I think there's a lot. I mean, there was an article in the Daily Mail, obviously a brilliant intellectual paper, saying about energy drinks causing ADHD. And it's like, oh, no, they don't. They might cause symptoms of hyperactivity that are similar to the profile of ADHD. But drinking a Monster or a Red Bull doesn't mean you're going to suddenly get ADHD. But that's what the article was effectively pushing.
Interesting.
So you've got these voices of dissent and stuff, but we just need to, as a society, I think ultimately we need to be more caring and empathetic and understand that it's really good that people are getting the support they need. And if that means they need a label to get that support, because I think that's where we're at, let's accept that and not fight it and go, oh, everyone's getting labelled, because that doesn't lead to anything positive.
I agree. And I think that's why words matter, don't they? And that's why it's so important that we reflect on the language that we're using. On that energy drinks thing, I did a group 3 weeks ago with the young people at Sophia on neurodiversity. And we had a discussion about energy drinks, and the kind of consensus in the room was fascinating. And actually we were talking about ADHD in relation to brain metabolism and how there's part of the brain that's understimulated and then parts of the brain that are overstimulated. And the young people were saying there's a real big misconception that energy drinks make me hyper. They don't. That's not true. For some young people, yes, it makes them hyper, and then they run around and then they're labelled as, oh, you know, they're running around and they've got ADHD, they've got so much energy. But there was at least 4 or 5 young people in the room that were saying, actually, I see my energy drink as it is effectively like a stimulant, but it stimulates the parts of my brain that are underactive. So it brings me up to this neutral balance. So if I have an energy drink in the morning, I'm able to reach my baseline and then do my maths paper and then do my English paper. Whereas I think the view of that is completely opposite, and there's not enough regard for that balance between the underactive and overactive parts of the brain. And I was like, that is so interesting that they are so aware of that. And again, that's why it's so important to listen to their voice and be able to think a bit more critically about it and move away from these assumptions and stereotypes that energy drinks are really bad. Okay, I'm not advocating that they're super healthy and really good for us, but, you know, do they give us ADHD? That's controversial.
I hear that a lot of adults, particularly, saying that they'll have an energy drink and then they'll go to sleep because it doesn't impact their brain in that way. And actually, if you look at, like, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but you look at Ritalin, which is the drug that's often used for ADHD. The impact on Ritalin on someone who's ADHD is that they will calm. It will put them into a calmer state. But supposedly, scientifically, if you give Ritalin to someone who hasn't got ADHD, it will make them really hyperactive. So that just shows how chemicals affect different brains differently. So it's the same thing with energy drinks. There's not enough research into it.
No.
But I absolutely get we shouldn't be. It's that blanket blaming of things.
Yeah,
You
one size fits all.
And I do understand energy drinks are not the best thing to drink for anyone because it's full of sugar and it's full of chemicals and you should be drinking water. But I mean, I sometimes drink energy drinks and because I feel like I need it to get myself into a more talkative state or whatever. And so, yeah, it's all of this stuff. We need to, we're throwing around these terms and throwing around these assumptions. We need to just be a bit more clever and realise that for some people it works.
Yeah.
And as long as that person is, contributing and functioning and part of community, then whatever they need to do to get there is fine. And we shouldn't just have this sort of blanket, right, we're banning all this stuff. I mean, schools do it as well. I mean, schools will ban energy drinks. And I get why they do it, but is that the biggest problem that you're facing, banning energy drinks? Is it more around, let's look at the individuals and what that individual needs to get them into school and get them learning, instead of just doing this blanket, right, this is our policy now. And I think we do that as a country very well. We have this sort of cultural policy, or look at these children messing around, drinking their monsters on the way to school. And it's like, who cares? As long as they're in school and contributing and learning, let's be more supportive.
Yeah, I agree. I was just thinking about when you were talking, it is that kind of energy drink argument, but it is that compassion. And you said it earlier on in this conversation, let's be asking why and what rather than coming at it with judgment and, automatically thinking that that's a bad thing. I think that's what I think the education system struggles with, is that it's challenging, and we try to do it here at Sophia, but it's challenging to... There's a difference between treating everybody equally and treating everybody fairly.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you had a policy that says absolutely no one can have energy drinks, then that's the school policy, right? And then you get in trouble for having energy drinks. Whereas if you've got a policy that says something along the same lines, but also you recognise that there might be a couple of people who need those energy drinks or other reasonable adjustments to cope and function, that's fair to that individual. So it might not be that every young person's treated exactly equally in terms of same rules, but it's fair for each individual, which is a form of equality, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's really hard to do it within the existing education system, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I think workplaces, particularly workplaces that are getting it right, are doing that now. They're doing this person-centred approach where ultimately, we're trying to do a lot of it now at Response, is when you first join the organisation, we sit down with the individual and say, right, what do you need? To be your best self at work, what do you need from your manager? What do you need from the organisation? And effectively putting a plan in place. And for some people, there's not much. But for some, it's like, right, I would prefer flexible working hours, or could I have a special keyboard? And we're doing that, I think, some organisations are starting to do that really well in employment. We need to shift that into schools then. Yeah. And I know it's harder in schools. You've got, if you've got an intake of 300 young people coming into a secondary school, it's hard to sit down with each individual person and go, right, what's your personalised approach? But I think you can do it to a certain degree where you get to know that person and go, right, with that young person, they need breaks. We've got an hour lesson, but they're only going to focus for 20 minutes. So let's give them a timeout card. And it's nothing to do with special needs, because that's often seen like, in that framing of special educational needs. Not to do with that. It's like that young person needs a card to flash to their teacher and step out after 20 minutes. And no one's going to bat an eyelid. Teacher's not going to go, oh, why are you leaving the classroom? We're just accepting it. And then there's one kid at the back who needs a laptop, and because that's how they process, because they're dyslexic possibly, or they just need to record that way. And every young person has a different approach, and that we accept that, because I think schools historically are quite good at doing that by framing it under special educational needs. But you've got to almost pass a test. Yeah. Do you have an EHCP?
Exactly.
Do you have access arrangements? Same with exams as well. Our whole exam system is set up where you've got to prove that you're allowed a laptop or a reader. Let's just say to the young person, right, you've got your GCSE next week in maths. What do you need to get the best maths result?
To be able to do it.
Do you need someone in the room with you reading the questions for you? Let's just do that. Why as a country do we need to it goes back to what you were saying. It's not about equality, it's about equity. Yeah. let's make it so everyone's on the same playing field. And we're not doing that in education. And I think that's where we need to go.
Yeah.
That person-centred, understand each individual. And you can frame it in sort of neurodiversity, because if you make adjustments on the basis of making adjustments for neurodivergent people, it will benefit everyone.
Yeah,
we're not saying, those people, because they've got labels, going back to what we were just saying, we're giving them preferential treatment. If we make the classroom space more inclusive for someone who's autistic, I think someone who's not autistic will still benefit from that. So let's just do it. Let's make these changes. We're trying to do that, as I said, at Response a lot with what we're doing is we just want a person-centred approach. We're framing it in neurodivergence and neurodiversity, but it's also just about if you haven't got ADHD, you're not dyslexic, you're not autistic, still, what do you need?
Yeah.
Do you need us to give you something different? And you haven't got a label, and we're not interested in that. We just want you to be the best worker, so we get the best outcome from you. And that's where we should be. And I think some organisations, particularly corporate organisations, some of them are doing that brilliantly. So there's pockets, again, of really good practice. Let's take that into places where it's not working and into schools where it's definitely not working.
Yeah, agreed. And that is going to need a big movement, because you have to do that without inflicting blame, and you've got to recognise that it's a systematic issue rather than like an individual school issue, and it all comes back to capacity, doesn't it? So for example, if you get a group of a year of young people, all year 7, they're all broken into tutor groups and there's one teacher and one TA, that's going to take a long time to give every single 30 of the students a personalised care plan effectively. But that's what should be happening, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
But it's all down to teacher capacity, isn't it? But that's as a result of the system. Yeah. Macro thinking system.
I mean, you said teaching assistants. I mean, my kids are in primary school. They don't have teaching assistants every day in their class. It's a capacity thing. They might have 6 classes and 4 teaching assistants, which means that a teaching assistant is split across 2 classes. So there's not even that. There's literally just one teacher in the room, one adult in the room. So, and that's funding. That's all it is. Schools are making tough decisions of, do we pay, even down to, do we pay enough to pay our electricity bills, or do we get another teaching assistant? Okay, well, we're going to have to go with electricity. It literally, I think, in some schools is at that level, and it's
shocking, isn't it?
It is shocking, and that's. I ultimately think it's a political decision. Again, it's like, what are we prioritising? We're prioritising certain parts of society that are going to vote for us, that are going to influence our decisions more than some schools in certain areas where, that's not a priority for the government, whichever government. I wouldn't say it's just our current government. I think even the other political parties are not pushing that enough. But it is a decision. It's not. Yeah. It's not a. The money is there if they want it to be there. Yeah. But they're choosing not to.
And I think that's where the frustration comes from. And there's I don't know what your view on this is, but it seems like there's obviously lots of different priorities on the agenda. Not priorities, sorry, let's call them like subjects on the agenda. So you've got education, mental health, the NHS in general. But actually, I think what we need to be looking at is, rather than seeing those things as in like silo, thinking about which one's then going to impact the other. So if we start with the education system, that would absolutely impact mental health and then the cost on the NHS. I know it's not that easy and it's much more complex, but I think, there just needs to be more urgency behind it.
And longer term thinking, I think, as well. I mean, it's almost like one model could be in primary school, when you first meet that child, that's when you do a lot of the work to understand that child. And you could do dyslexia screening, autism screening, ADHD screening, just, literally not the full assessment, but just a screening of every child. And also do a social care screening and go, right, what families are we worried about that maybe at the moment are doing okay, but if their dad lost a job, their mum lost a job, is that going to cause them to fall into poverty? So is that family being flagged to social care? Even at the moment, they're not on social care's radar. Are we flagging that? Are we flagging children for neurodiversity and educational access arrangements? Are we flagging healthcare issues? And if we did that with every single child in this country at maybe sort of 6 or 7 years old, then we can plan for that child's journey right the way through to GCSEs and A-levels. And they're just on the radar of the whole system, going, right, we need to just watch that family. They're not a concern at the moment, but we need to watch them because they might struggle.
Yeah.
Because some kids would be like, okay, there's nothing there, everything seems secure, we'll still keep an eye on them, but they're not going to be kind of on our radar.
Yeah.
We could do that, and that would help the whole system, I think.
Absolutely.
But again, that's long-term thinking, and it's joined-up thinking, which I think working in charities, we're quite aware sometimes that the NHS doesn't always talk to social care. They operate in their own and they don't talk to education. There's not a lot of join-up there. So I think that's a barrier as well as funding stuff as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think that model that you were talking about in terms of primary schools, that is like really early intervention. And actually, my view on that is that those young people one day are going to potentially become parents and have their own young people. So if, like you say, if everything we do, we have children in mind, we're also going to be supporting the future generation of parents, and therefore maybe having some influence on those intergenerational family dynamics. Or, you know, we see how much poverty and how much trauma is kind of sewn into family dynamics, and how that is literally just handed down like a manuscript, right? And it's like, this is how I was brought up and I'm going to teach you the same. And that's not the parents' fault. But if we can support those parents when they're 6 or 7, it would have so much impact, wouldn't it? So I think, I agree, we need to be thinking much more longer term about it.
Yeah, and ultimately it would save money.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about, obviously you're, Sophia, are aware of this as sort of the food bank provision. You've got more and more families accessing food banks. Could it have been for some families 6 years ago that the parents had a class on interview skills, which meant they could get that job, that means that they don't access the food bank? But we don't think that way. We think literally at the point of need.
Firefighting, yeah.
Here we are, right, here's your food parcel. What else can we do for you? But if we'd done something 5-10 years ago with that family, we wouldn't have got to the point of the food banks.
Exactly.
And we know they're on the rise. The shocking statistic, there are more food banks in this country than there are McDonald's now.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's shocking.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow.
Like these little statistics that in silo we kind of go, oh, that's quite shocking, and we kind of scoff at it, and people will write articles about. But bring them all together and go,
a whole impact. Yeah, that shook me, that did.
yeah.
Blimey. Yeah, we always say that here. Our food redistribution part of the organisation shouldn't have to exist. People shouldn't be going hungry.
No.
People shouldn't be needing to, be a larder member, really. But you're right, it's a lot of the money and resources put into that perpetual crisis management, effectively, isn't it? That when people are already too far downstream and struggling to swim anymore. So,
and then relying on charities.
Yeah.
So we know that working in the charity sector, I think at the moment is one of the toughest it's ever been from a funding perspective.
Yeah, hugely.
If we took these charities away and went, no, we don't need charities in this country, we'd be destroyed. Charities shouldn't exist. I know that the Trussell Trust, one of their mantras is they want to make it to a point where they shouldn't exist. They want to do themselves out of an organisation, because they're saying that government should be doing this. We should be having all the structures in society, meaning that people don't go to food banks. But charities generally, they shouldn't exist. And we're seeing more and more charities sort of popping up, but then also the struggle for funding. And yeah, it's another sign that we've got issues with our structure in this country.
Social reform is needed.
Yeah.
So to slightly go down a different pathway, would you be open to talking about your own experience of neurodiversity?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed as autistic when I was 40. So I'm 42 now. So it's only I'm nearly 42. It's only been a couple of years. So yeah, neurodiversity, neurodivergence, autism is something quite new for me. And like I said, I was a teacher. I would say probably while I was teaching, I didn't know what all that stuff meant. All the stuff that I spend probably most of my waking life now thinking about, I didn't know even 2 or 3 years ago, but particularly when I was a teacher. So I grew up not knowing I was autistic. I did well at school, did fine. I wouldn't say I did brilliantly well. I had loads of friends who were kind of getting A stars and stuff. I didn't perform at that level, but I did. I attended school every single day. I found school okay. There were definitely things that I struggled with, but I didn't know any different. I was just myself. And I went through, took that into teaching as well. And so when I was a teacher, I didn't know anything about myself, but I also didn't really know much about autism. So I taught in a school, my first school that I taught in actually had an autism base that supported, it was only boys, but autistic children, it's meant to be children, but it was only boys they really supported, who would be sort of driven in from all over, it was in Hampshire, so all over the county they'd come in. So you would hope that as a school we understood what autism was, but we didn't really. There wasn't much training. We just had these autistic children who would sit in our classrooms and they'd have an extra teaching assistant and we just teach our normal lessons. So I had no understanding of what autism was or anything like that. And it was only when I became a parent with my son, who's now 10, that I started realising what being autistic meant, because he is autistic. I think originally we thought he was ADHD because he was very hyperactive, that kind of profile. But it was actually the school that we're in were really good, and they sat us down and said, we think he needs some support. We think there's something. The Senko at my son's primary school is absolutely brilliant. She's actually on maternity leave at the moment, but the current Senko is also brilliant. But she was the one that sat us down and kind of went, I think there's something here, we need to support him. And we think it's autism. And we hadn't, as parents, thought that. We were kind of thinking, oh, maybe it's ADHD, there's something. So we went down that pathway, and that's when I started realising what autism was. I'd heard the word. I think I probably had stereotypical perceptions of what autism is and was. But started researching a lot, because I think, I now know it as my autistic profile, but one thing for me is if I get into something, I really get into it.
Do you kind of like really hyper
fixate
on it? Yeah.
Focus, it becomes like a special interest. And so it always happened as a kid, like if I got into a new band, like a new music act, I would have to know where they were born, how they met as a group, what was their first album, all of that stuff. Whereas my friends would be like, oh, it's a cool song. And I'd be like, yeah, it's a cool song, but did you realise they recorded it? So I've always been of this obsessive sort of way of doing things. So when we got on the pathway for the diagnosis for my son's autism, I got obsessed with what does this mean? What are his life chances? And you start reading that stuff and you get quite depressed, because the headline figures are quite depressing about life chances and stuff. But then you dig into it and think, actually, he's going to be fine. We can support him. We're probably going to need to do this. And then along that pathway, it's like, oh, autism is hereditary. It often runs in families. I wonder where his autism comes from. And it was almost like a light bulb moment where I was like, maybe it's me.
That must have been a really interesting moment.
It was really, I almost sort of remember it. I was just, as we all do in an evening, on my phone, just like doing some research and stuff. And I was reading this bit, so I was going, hang on. Well, it's probably not my wife, because she's not autistic, and she's, if we hit the stereotypes, she's very social and she's really good at making connections and stuff. And then I look at myself and go, I'm not great at that stuff. And I do get obsessed about things. And so I did one of the online surveys, tests that you can do. And it came out going, basically saying, there's a very, very high chance you're autistic. It wasn't even very, it was like very, it was there, it was like 90-something%.
Brilliant.
And I'm like, yeah, I think I'm autistic. And I kind of said this to my wife. I said, I think I'm autistic. And she's like, yeah, I think you probably are.
Ah, interesting.
And then we sort of talked about other people in my family, and it's like, there is a thread of these certain traits. So then it was this massive moment for me of like, I think I am, but I needed to know. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the really interesting things about autism and all neurodivergence is, do we need the labels? Should we have a diagnosis?
Yeah, of course.
In some ways we shouldn't. We should support people for their individual needs. But for me, particularly I think being 40, so literally 40 years of my life of not knowing, I felt I need to know. Yeah. I need to understand. Like I said, I had a good childhood, loving parents, well supported at school, went to university. I've got a master's. I succeeded. So in some ways, it's like I did okay in life. But there were moments particularly in my childhood and maybe sort of university age, where I was like, that didn't go very well. And I blamed myself. Like, there's social things where I lost friends and social situations went really badly. And yeah, I was blaming myself. I was quite anxious and going, I'm just crap at this. Whereas if I have a diagnosis, it's not an excuse, but it was a reason to go, but that wasn't your fault.
Yeah, it's an explanation of the way that you responded. Yeah.
So I needed to know that. So I saw, again, a privileged position to seek a private diagnosis. And again, that's one of the issues with this country is the wait lists are ridiculously long, or you can pay for it, but they're actually quite expensive. But I kind of had this conversation with my wife where I was like, I need to know, can we please spend some money on this? And we both agreed. It was like, yeah, let's do it. We could probably just about afford to kind of do it. So yeah, and then getting that diagnosis, it was October the 3rd, which for me was wonderful because that's from Mean Girls.
Mean Girls, yeah.
And Mean Girls is my favourite film. So it's perfect.
Did you plan that?
No, I didn't realise until about a year afterwards. I was like, hang on, that's October 3rd.
It's October 3rd.
Yeah. So, and it was just, it was tough actually to get the build-up, because the build-up is very much like you have to gather the information before you actually have the sit-down assessment. So I had to get my parents to fill out a history of what I was like as a child, which was quite tough for them because you're literally going, what happened 30 years ago?
I can imagine.
So there wasn't much. And then I got my wife to fill out, but basically the clinician came back and went, there's not much there from your parents, but because you're so much older, can you get your wife to do it to see how you present now? And she filled out, and I remember reading what she wrote, and I was like, really heartbreaking to read. Like, I can't believe that. I didn't realise I was like that. So there were tough moments, but then the diagnostic appointment, it was a 3-hour appointment, but I think they took about 5 minutes. So they went away at the end and went, we're going to go away now and we're going to talk for 20 minutes or so. Just stay on the Zoom meeting, because it was all over Zoom, and we'll come back and tell you what we think. And literally 5 minutes later, they're like, oh, yeah, you're autistic.
So they were certain fairly quickly.
They were pretty certain. And for me, it was just a moment of relief. I remember I was smiling. I smiled so much and they said to me, oh, you seem to be really happy. And I was like, yeah, because it just explains so much. And again, it's not an excuse for whatever, behaviours in the past. No, not that I did bad things, but it's not an excuse for kind of things that maybe didn't go well. And it's not an excuse to suddenly go, right, I'm not going to socialise now. And it's not that, but it's a reason. It's an understanding of this is who I am as a person. And my special interest still is understanding autism. Like, my wife hates it, but like every time a new book comes out about autism, like, right, I'm buying that. So Amazon are sending me these books. Sometimes I get them sent to work address so that she doesn't see that they've arrived.
Clever.
Yes.
I think you might have showed me a photo of your bookcase actually
last
time
it's just
we
all
met.
I haven't read them all yet, but it's all because I'm obsessed with it. But it helps me understand myself. It helps me understand my son, because he struggles. He's struggling at the moment, particularly with school attendance and school not being great for him. So I want to support him. I want a role model for him and show him that it's going to be okay. But also I feel I'm privileged working for an organisation that wants to do something with this.
Yeah, 100%.
So we're kind of like, well, put some energy into this. So they're giving me time to go to conferences if they're kind of relevant, or to do training, and they're paying for for certain resources and stuff to support not just me but everyone. So I want to use that privilege and go, right, let's become a bit of a kind of lived experience expert, so that I can make things better for the next generation, for my son, but also other young people that we kind of support.
And that's such a good use of resource, because it's like you say, it's not only benefiting you as an individual, but other neurodivergents in your organisation, and therefore the organisation and the young people that you support and all the other beneficiaries. So it makes complete sense, and it's amazing that your organisation is so passionate about investing in this and driving it forward, because in terms of making positive social change, it starts with organisations like Response in order to get those conversations happening, and just expose people to those conversations. That's where it starts, isn't it? Is the exposure to that, and people like you investing, and even tiny things. Not saying that it's like invaluable, but reposting something on LinkedIn, or sharing your thoughts on something, like those things are so valuable, aren't they? I always see your book recommendations. I'm like, that's going in my Amazon basket.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that because I guess it's an advantage of being a bit older. When I got my diagnosis, is I'm not always a confident person, but I'm quite confident in where I am in life to say, yeah, I'm autistic.
Yeah.
Whereas some people, I think it's tough, particularly in the work environment, to say, because they fear that that's going to then lead to not getting promotions, or not getting the support they need, or maybe being managed out of an organisation. But I feel pretty confident in response and with myself to go, yeah, I am autistic. And even doing that, I mean, we've sort of been doing a lot of work, and I'm getting a lot of sort of feedback saying, basically, thank you for being so open, because it's meant that other people can kind of go, yeah, I'm autistic, or I have ADHD, or I'm dyslexic, and that it's not stigmatized, at least within response. We need to then impact the wider society. But yeah, I feel very able to do that. If you look at my email signature, it says I am autistic, and it links to an article that people can read, or a video that people can watch. I'm happy to go into meetings with external people and go, yeah, I'm autistic. But don't judge me in a negative way. You need to just accept that I'm going to do things differently, and just get on with it.
Yeah.
And I can do that, but I think partly because of, like I said, I'm older, so I've lived it sounds like I'm really old. I've lived a life, but I feel confident in that. And but then I've also got managers behind me, my manager and also our CEO Nicola, who are like, yeah, just do it. Yeah, we've got your back on this. Just go and do this stuff. And that helps, because then if I've had a few moments where people go, oh, you don't look autistic, and all that whole thing.
Yeah.
But I know that I can go, but I am, and Nicola knows I am, and she's the CEO of a really big organisation.
Yeah.
So deal with it. I mean, I've not said that, but I feel
That's
the confidence
of
it. So I'm like, yeah, well, it's fine. You can challenge me if you want, but you're wrong.
Yeah.
I'm not wrong. So I feel like that's. So I'm trying to use that for good, to kind of really sort of, I use LinkedIn a lot, particularly just to connect with people and build up a network, because there are loads of other great people that are doing the same stuff. And if we build that network, then we're going to have more change, I think.
Yeah, 100%. How do you approach or respond to when people say those comments? So, for example, you don't look autistic, everybody's a little bit autistic. Without trying to generalise too much, I've definitely heard people from the older generation kind of alluding to that autistic people are just difficult and they should just get on with it, as in get on with the neurotypical or holistic way of doing things. How do you respond that, and how do you think we should best have those conversations with those types of people without trying to group them too much? But hopefully that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people working in CAMS who you think kind of understand mental health, but also they are tasked with particularly autism, ADHD diagnosis. I've heard them say, oh, we're all on the spectrum. No, that linear spectrum of very autistic to not autistic. I've heard that from professionals that should know better. It is tough, because I do understand it is a generational thing a lot of the time, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that they grew up in a time where it wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
So I get that. I think for me, it's actually challenging back. So if someone says, oh, we're all on the spectrum, going, no, we're not. Because I think most people at that point, when we challenge them, want to learn.
Yes.
Not everyone. Yeah. Some people are belligerent and don't want to learn and will fight you. And I've had a couple of exchanges on LinkedIn with random people, where I've commented something about like school attendance, and someone's come back and go, oh, well, people need to just go to school. It's like, no.
If only that was that easy.
and there wasn't movement. Yeah, okay. I wasn't moving and they weren't moving. But I think in person, I've done that a few times, where people have gone, oh, we're on the spectrum. Go, no, we're not. Actually, the spectrum of autism is not a linear spectrum. It's a colour wheel.
Yeah.
And this is what, and most people go, oh, okay, I didn't realise. Yeah. I'm really sorry that I said that. Or tell me more about that. So I think it is challenging. I mean, it's the same with mental health. It's when some people go, oh, I'm a little bit OCD. And I think sometimes we let that slide, but we need to challenge, going, are you actually OCD? Yeah. Do you actually have a diagnosis? Oh, no, then you're not OCD, so please don't use that term.
And there's still that kind of link to being clean.
Yeah.
Which is something that, I've personally challenged that before.
Yeah, so I think we need to, and it is, I understand again, if you're younger particularly, if you're a young person in school or whatever, you don't always feel you can challenge adults or more senior people when they say things, but I think we need to. And again, I think I'm in a position where if someone will say that now, I will call that out. I was on a meeting, an online meeting a couple of months ago, and someone had put on a slide on the screen ASD to denote autism. And one of the other senior managers from one of the healthcare trusts put in the chat, she went, "Can you change that slide, please? It should either say ASC or preferably just autism." And the person leading the meeting read it and went, "Oh yeah, absolutely, I'm going to change it for next time. Really sorry, I was rushing when I put the slides together, whatever." Right. But again, it was brilliant to see some, because I was there in the meeting thinking, I'm not sure whether I can challenge they've put that, because these people are contract holders of all the money and I'm coming in almost trying to get some money, so I can't challenge it. But it was so refreshing to see this other person come in and go, "No, that's wrong, change it."
Yeah, that's great.
So I think if enough people again are doing that, then we will see change.
Yeah.
But it's not being afraid to just go, "Oh, you're wrong there." Well, I don't look autistic. Well, what does autism look like then? That's the comeback for that. It's like, okay, what does an autistic person look like? Because either they'll back down or they're going to dig themselves into a hole of being quite offensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at that point, they're going to look bad, and I think they'll realise they look bad, and then they will backtrack.
Hopefully there'll be some reflection.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we just need, it doesn't have to be aggressive challenge, but just going, well, what do you mean by that? Yeah. Or are you sure?
Yeah.
And then that will,
it's almost like coaching, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
Being able to, this is something we talked about yesterday, but disagree agreeably and just be like, actually, that's not the case. The ASC, so autism spectrum condition, I just use autism, autistic, an autistic person. Even the ASC for some people, and I think my view is better than ASD, but it still references that spectrum. And I think when people think spectrum, they think linear spectrum. So I think if we're going to use ASC, we need it in line with the circular colour spectrum rather than the linear one, because and again, that's just, coming back to people's views and people that maybe do use terms and kind of language that is now harmful and unhelpful. It's all about what they learn at the time. So if you look at the kind of research around autism from the 80s, it's outdated and, offensive, some of it. Yeah. Whereas now, I think if people are just open to the idea that theory and learning and lived experience and even the science, the neuroscience behind autism has evolved, if people are open to recognising that things change, then, that's somewhere to start, isn't it? You can look at it in a mental health capacity as well. Like, something that I learnt 6 years ago about anxiety is probably completely different now, but that's okay. We evolve as humans, and I think we need to be more open to unlearning and relearning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in ASC, the word condition is problematic because it's that medical model of understanding it. And I mean, again, sometimes that is helpful, but to medicalise it sometimes for an individual person, because it means that they might get access arrangements if they've got a certain sort of diagnosis. But it's not a condition. No. Because a condition suggests that I've got something wrong with me compared to someone who's not got that condition. Because we use condition when we talk about even things like cancer, which are medical kind of problems that someone has got in their life. But that's not what autism is. You're born autistic, you die autistic, you're not going to stop being autistic. It's not caused by something, so it's not really a condition in that way. So I think that's why, I just prefer autistic. Yeah. But then you look at the DSM, which is the diagnostic manual, and up until 2005, I think it was, we had Asperger's in there as a separate autism type that was kind of high functioning,
more social,
all of that kind of stuff. And now that's not in there. I mean, it's interesting because when I was diagnosed, that wasn't even an option. Whereas if you go back even a few years before that, there are a lot of people who do have Asperger's as their diagnosis,
and therefore I still identify.
Yeah,
with
and they do
label.
identify, and that's important to them, and that's fine for them as an individual. But it's interesting that we're moving to, like you were just saying, when things change. There isn't Asperger's and then autism; it's just autism now. Yeah. So we need to understand that language changes and it develops, and we just need to move with that development. And it's not okay, particularly as a professional, to kind of go, oh well, I was taught this. Well, it doesn't matter that you were taught this 20 years ago. That was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Keep up.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
So we need people, going back to the conversation we had around critical thinking, we need to be encouraging in our young people now to think critically, to have open mindsets that are willing to grow rather than being regimented or rigid in their ways of thinking. And that starts by asking questions, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, it's hard. I mean, even with like the term neurodivergence, I would say even 6 months ago, people were saying neurodiversity. Whereas now we use neurodivergence in that way.
Okay.
That, so you have a neurodivergent condition, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, etc.
Okay.
Some people say, I have a neurodiversity. And the thinking now is, no, we're all neurodiverse. Like literally everyone.
So
every
true.
brain is different. If you sit in a room of 20 people, you've got 20 different brain types. So we're all neurodiverse, but some of us are neurodivergent. But I would say 6 months ago even, people were saying, "Oh, we're all neurodivergent. I've got a neurodiversity." It's like, no, you haven't got a neurodiversity. You've got a neurodivergent condition because we're all neurodiverse. So, and it's hard to keep up.
Yeah,
then.
but that's something I've literally just taken away. I didn't realise that. So that's amazing that you can. Yeah, because my understanding was that the word neurodivergent was like an umbrella term that kind of encapsulates all those patterns, I guess, right? But yeah, neurodivergence.
Yeah.
There you go. There's my takeaway.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, I do understand people who are not in that field. It is hard to keep up.
Yeah.
But it is just about being flexible and empathetic again.
Yeah.
Just keep learning
Yeah.
and keep listening. Listen to autistic people as well. If we're talking about autism, listening to autistic people and be curious about that individual. Don't just go on stereotypes and sort of those stigma ideas that we've got.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway for people listening, because there are, people within this organisation, outside the organisation, that are kind of constantly coming and saying, we want to learn more, we need to know more. So having this conversation with you has been amazing and so interesting. And I'm really interested on, seeing more. And actually, I think having those takeaways for people is so beneficial, because there are people that are curious and there are people that are confused, because the learning is, it's a lot and it's quick and it's constantly evolving, isn't it? So I think, having conversations like this with people like yourself is amazing, so people can listen and go, okay, cool, and then implement it in their own families, communities, workplaces. It really does make a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah. I guess the message generally is what we were just saying, is like, listen. And if we're bringing it back to young people, listen to young people. To not get cheesy, but they're the future, isn't it? So let's listen to young people, listen to the groups. There was recently, I think it was Ambitious About Autism, did some posts, and they had a young person, I'm not sure how old she was, but maybe she was sort of late teens, and she was talking on a national news channel about what it means to grow up in a school and being neurodivergent. That for me was so much more powerful than listening even to an autistic adult. Because it was like, this is the future. This is going to be the future of the workforce and everything we do as a country. So we need to listen to young people and how they feel about being neurodivergent or autistic or whatever. Yeah,
100%. That is so important. I think that is the key message, isn't it, to take away?
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This conversation has been really, really amazing and really interesting. And without sounding cheesy, you are really like an inspiration. I think the work that you're doing, not only in your professional life, but your personal life, is just fantastic. And I hope you keep going. And I'll be advocating for you. And
Thank you. Thank you for supporting me, yeah.
A huge thank you to Jamie for coming onto the Sophia Sessions podcast. What an interesting and engaging conversation that was. If you want to support Jamie or find out more what he's doing, I will post links in the chat below, and also recommendations to a couple of books and texts that he mentioned during this episode. As always, if you want to find out more about what we do at Sophia, please go to our website, www.sophia.uk.com, or if you need support, you can email us at wellbeing@sophia.uk.com. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. It really does help us. The more exposure we get, the more young people we can support.